Black Hawk crosses the Mississippi, defying U.S. orders, and suddenly Illinois erupts in panic. Enter Abraham Lincoln, a lanky volunteer captain with zero experience, fumbling through patrols and burials. The war's short brutality didn't scar him with wounds, but it etched hard truths about leadership and native resistance that echoed all the way to the White House. The Black Hawk War erupted in 1832, a flashpoint in the American Midwest where federal ambitions clashed with native defiance. It lasted just months, from April to August, pitting U.S. forces against a coalition led by Sauk warrior Black Hawk. This wasn't a grand campaign like the Seminole Wars, but its ripples reshaped the frontier. Settlers poured into Illinois, eyeing fertile lands once held by Sauk and Fox tribes, while the government pushed removal policies under Andrew Jackson. The conflict highlighted the raw mechanics of expansion: treaties signed under duress, broken promises, and a military machine grinding forward. Black Hawk's stand became a symbol of resistance, exposing how native sovereignty crumbled against waves of migration. Meanwhile, a young Abraham Lincoln, fresh from splitting rails, joined the fray, marking his first taste of organized chaos. Though minor in scale, the war mirrored larger patterns, where land hunger fueled bloodshed and set precedents for future displacements like the Trail of Tears. It wasn't just about battles, it was the U.S. testing its muscle on the edge of empire, with consequences echoing through policy and memory. Think of it as 1832's equivalent of a border skirmish going viral in a pre-telegraph world. News traveled by writer and rumor, amplifying fears among farmers who saw every shadow as a war party. The war's brevity belied its impact, forcing tribes westward and clearing paths for railroads that would later bind the nation. Lincoln's involvement, though peripheral, planted seeds of perspective on leadership amid disorder. In the end, this episode peeled back the veneer of manifest destiny, revealing the human cost. Families uprooted, cultures strained, and a nation forging ahead on contested ground. It began with a disputed treaty from 1804, where Sauk and Fox leaders allegedly ceded vast territories east of the Mississippi for a pittance. Black Hawk, a seasoned warrior born around 1767, rejected it outright, claiming the signers lacked authority and were plied with alcohol. By 1830, under Jackson's Indian Removal Act, the tribes faced eviction from their Illinois villages. Black Hawk's band, known as the British Band for their lingering ties to Canada, had wintered west of the river but grew restless. In spring 1831, tensions boiled when settlers torched Sauk crops and homes, prompting Black Hawk to threaten return. He consulted allies, including the Winnebago prophet White Cloud, who urged reclaiming the land. On the 5th of April, 1832, Black Hawk led about 1,000 people, half non-combatants, back across the Mississippi into Illinois, aiming for Rock Island to plant corn and rally support. Settlers panicked, flooding governors with pleas for protection. Rumors painted Black Hawk's group as invaders, though their intent was more resettlement than raid. Illinois Governor John Reynolds called up militia, framing it as defense against hostiles. Jackson, viewing it as defiance of federal law, mobilized regulars under General Henry Atkinson. Black Hawk sought peaceful occupation, but skirmishes erupted when militiamen fired on emissaries. The escalation was inevitable, a mix of miscommunication and mutual distrust, where one side saw survival and the other saw threat. Federal troops pursued, turning a migration into pursuit. Black Hawk's resistance underscored the flaws in removal policy, a bureaucratic steamroller ignoring tribal bonds to the soil. In modern terms, it was like evicting tenants from a lease they never agreed to, then calling the cops when they showed up with suitcases. Abraham Lincoln stepped into the Black Hawk War as a volunteer in the Illinois militia, a move that pulled him from his quiet life as a store clerk and rail splitter in New Salem. At 23, he had no military background, yet his neighbors elected him captain of a volunteer company in late April 1832, right as Governor Reynolds mustered troops to counter Black Hawk's crossing. Lincoln's unit marched to Beardstown, then up the Rock River, handling logistics more than combat, like burying the dead from earlier skirmishes. His leadership showed in small acts, enforcing discipline amid boredom and supply shortages. But the real test came in the war's disorganized start, where militia units clashed over ranks and rations as much as with Sauk scouts. Think of it as 1832's boot camp from hell, where volunteers learned that war meant endless patrols under a relentless sun, not the glory they signed up for. Lincoln re-enlisted twice after his initial term, serving until July, but saw no direct fighting, his days filled with marches that covered hundreds of miles without a single shot fired in anger. The early phase of the conflict unfolded in fits and starts, with militia forces scrambling to track Black Hawk's band through Illinois prairies and woods. Initial encounters were minor, like the Stillman's Run debacle in May, where overconfident militiamen fled from a small Sauk raiding party, leaving their camp in ruins and boosting Black Hawk's morale. Lincoln's group arrived too late for that mess, instead dealing with the aftermath, digging graves for fallen settlers and guarding supply lines against phantom threats. The war's brutality emerged in these opening weeks, not through epic battles, but in the slow grind of pursuit, where hunger and disease thinned ranks faster than bullets. Black Hawk evaded capture, raiding farms for food while U.S. regulars under Atkinson joined the fray, turning a local panic into a federal operation. Lincoln later joked about his service, claiming he survived charges of mosquitoes and once wrestled a comrade over a fence post. But the experience quietly built his knack for command, handling mutinous troops who wanted to go home when the fighting stayed elusive. The war peaked at the Battle of Bad Axe on the 1st of August and 1832, along the Mississippi River in present-day Wisconsin, where Atkinson's forces cornered Black Hawk's exhausted group. Numbering around 500, including many women and children, the Sauk tried to cross the river to safety, but Steamboat Warrior arrived first, its cannon firing into the crowd on the eastern bank. Militia and regulars closed in, turning retreat into slaughter as Sauk warriors fought to shield the non-combatants wading into the water. Over 2 days, U.S. troops picked off swimmers and those hiding in willows, with estimates of 150 to 300 Sauk killed, while American losses stayed light, around a dozen. It was less a battle than a rout, with survivors recounting how pleas for mercy went ignored, bodies piling up in the current like driftwood after a storm. In today's terms, imagine a drone strike on a refugee column, except with muskets and bayonets doing the work up close. Survivors surrendered piecemeal, Black Hawk captured days later by Winnebago allies who handed him over for a bounty. The war ended there, but Jackson's removal machine kept rolling, forcing remaining Sauk and Fox west with treaties that carved up their lands. Black Hawk toured eastern cities as a captive spectacle, drawing crowds curious about the savage who dared resist, before settling in Iowa under guard. He dictated his autobiography in 1833, framing his stand as defense of home, not aggression, a narrative that echoed in later native resistance movements. The conflict's legacy lingered in policy shifts, hardening U.S. approaches to tribal relocations, while for figures like Lincoln, it became a footnote of frontier grit, referenced in speeches as proof he understood the cost of holding a line, even if his own war stayed bloodless. The Black Hawk War rippled outward like a stone skipped across the Mississippi, sinking deeper into the fabric of American expansion. For the Sauk and Fox tribes, the defeat meant more than lost battles. It accelerated their forced relocation, stripping away not just land but the seasonal rhythms that defined their existence. Under the Treaty of 1832, they ceded 6 million acres in exchange for annuities and a smaller reservation in Iowa, a deal signed amid grief and coercion that echoed the broader Indian Removal Act's machinery. Black Hawk's resistance, though crushed, inspired whispers among other tribes, a reminder that standing firm could buy time, even if the cost piled high in unmarked graves. The war hardened federal policies, turning Jackson's administration into a blueprint for efficiency and displacement. Where military might backed bureaucratic ink, settlers flooded Illinois unchecked, transforming prairies into farms and towns, while native economies fractured, reliant now on government handouts that rarely arrived whole. In a twist of frontier irony, the very lands Black Hawk fought for became the cradle of Midwestern prosperity. Railroads slicing through what were once hunting grounds, as if the earth itself forgot the blood soaked into it. Abraham Lincoln's brush with the conflict lingered like a faint scar, shaping his views on authority and empathy in subtle ways. Though his service amounted to patrols and paperwork, the chaos exposed him to the raw edges of command, dealing with insubordinate troops and the moral haze of pursuing families labeled as threats. Later, as president, he referenced the war sparingly, but it informed his handling of native affairs during the Civil War era, where uprisings like the Dakota War of 1862 tested his resolve. Lincoln approved executions and relocations, decisions that mirrored the Black Hawk precedent, yet he also commuted sentences, hinting at a complexity born from those Illinois summers. The war's legacy extended to cultural memory, with Black Hawk's autobiography becoming a rare native voice in print. challenging settler narratives and fueling abolitionist parallels between Indian removal and slavery's chains. It set a pattern for how the U.S. framed resistance as rebellion, justifying escalations that dotted the West with forts and forgotten treaties. In modern hindsight, it's like watching a corporate merger where one side never got the memo, the fallout lingering in reservations where poverty echoes the original dispossession. This brief war, tucked into 1832's annals, stands as a stark snapshot of America's westward hunger, where ambition clashed against ancestral ties in a lopsided gamble. Black Hawk's defiance wasn't quixotic. It was a calculated push against erasure, highlighting how treaties served as tools of conquest rather than pacts of peace. The conflict's end at Bad Axe didn't resolve tensions but amplified them, paving the way for larger upheavals like the Seminole Wars and the Navajo Long Walk, each building on the removal template tested in Illinois. For the U.S., it validated military intervention as policy enforcement, embedding a doctrine that viewed native lands as temporary holdings until manifest destiny claimed them. Lincoln's tangential role added a layer of historical irony, a future unifier first blooded in division, his militia days a quiet prologue to the national fractures he'd later mend. The war matters because it strips away romantic notions of the frontier, revealing a grind of logistics, fear, and opportunism that built a nation on contested soil. Understanding the Black Hawk War pulls back the curtain on expansion's underbelly, where victories came at the expense of cultures clinging to their roots. It reminds us that history isn't a straight march forward, but a tangled path marked by choices that echo across generations, from reservation boundaries to ongoing land rights battle. In a darkly amusing turn, Black Hawk became a tourist attraction in his captivity, paraded like a trophy while his story seeped into folklore, a symbol of resilience amid overwhelming odds. The importance lies in its role as a cautionary pivot, showing how small conflicts foreshadowed the sweeping dispossessions that reshaped the continent, leaving legacies of resistance that persist in tribal sovereignty fights today. It's a window into the mechanics of empire building, where one man's return home ignited a chain reaction of relocation and regret, forever altering the Midwest's map and the nation's conscience. The Black Hawk War sealed fates on the frontier, a quick clash that echoed through treaties and trails. Black Hawk's stand faded, but the push west rolled on, carving scars into native lands. Reflect on this slice of expansion's cost, where resistance met removal's blade. Subscribe to Histories and Native Tales for more unflinching dives into the past. Comment your thoughts below,